It's my absolute pleasure to talk to Dan Held today. Dan is the Director of Growth Marketing for Kraken, one of the three most popular exchanges in the world. Dan has been in crypto for over 8 years and is by far one of the most respected people in the space. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Dan, today.
Well, thanks for having me, Pedro. And you're making me blush over here. That was really, really nice of you.
So just to get us started, and a lot of my subscribers are actually pre-coiners and no-coiners. And so if you could give us a little bit of information about your past, what were you doing before getting involved in crypto, and what got you so excited to dedicate your life to this technology?
Yeah, so I studied finance in undergrad university. There, I was studying during the 2008 financial crisis. When that happened, the books were wrong that I was reading, the professors were wrong, and everyone on TV was wrong. And so I figured that the system had been fundamentally broken. And because of that, I became like a more libertarian gold bug type. Then I stumbled upon Bitcoin in 2012. It's really, for me, Bitcoin represented like a gold 2.0, a digital gold that we have been looking for this whole time. It was a solution to the central banking and banking problem. And that's why I got into it. That's why I think it's so valuable, is that it fundamentally solves the problem of trust in the economy. Having to trust a central bank not to print more money than they have, not to print too much money, or to trust banks to hold our money for us. And they lend it out, and then there's moments like 2008 where they don't have all the money in the bank, right? Well, they don't inherently because they're fractional reserve, but it's in those moments when we realize how fragile the system is. And with Bitcoin, no one can control the money supply. It's all automated. And when you hold your own Bitcoin, you have full self-custody, full ownership over your coins. Kind of like how when you hold gold and you bury it somewhere, only you know where it is. And I think that's super, super valuable.
Yeah, I mean, and along those lines, because I find it very interesting about people, it took me a while actually to understand Bitcoin and finally like take the dive into transacting with it and getting involved in the protocol. Did it take a while for you to understand the technology? But I guess if you were already gold bug, you must have already been along that path.
Yeah. I mean, it took years. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I just woke up and understood Bitcoin. There was a lot of technical jargon too back in my era. Back when I was around, there wasn't a lot of good content. There weren't many YouTube videos, podcasts, long form articles. It was all pretty complicated and not really understandable in an easy to digest manner. And that was part of the reason why I started to write and speak, is I felt it took me, my ladder was like 10 feet tall to climb up to learn about Bitcoin. And I want to make that ladder 2 feet tall, where it doesn't take you a couple of years, it takes you a couple months, maybe, or a couple of weeks. And so that's what I really kind of dedicated myself to content-wise, is making sure the content's digestible, simple, and covers a lot of different topics, so people feel like they understand Bitcoin better after reading it.
Brilliant. I'm actually a big fan of your content, and if I might as well go along that path now, because you've written a lot about the Bitcoin, or what's called the Bitcoin Supercycle. And I'd love if you could elaborate a little bit about this theory, and how you came to this conclusion, and how you see the current market aligning with that view.
Yeah, so the supercycle theory I came up with in 2019 when Bitcoin was $8,000. The supercycle theory, the basics of it is that this time might be different. And the reason why it might be different, you've got the 4-year Bitcoin microcycle. So that cycle occurs every 4 years. And then you've got the macro cycle of the mainstream economy, where we typically see a recession every 8 to 10 years. And what happens when those two moments occur at the same time, where people wake up and realize, Bitcoin is a life raft from this existing financial system. And, when they start to lose trust in their government, that's when they see the problem of trust and how Bitcoin is solving that. So that's what I kind of coined as the super cycles. What happens in that aha moment, because in 2013, 2017, those Bitcoin bull runs occurred during a macro bull run, not during a moment when people started to question their government, question their money. So I think that's what I, kind of originally scoped out as a super cycle. Some of the signals of that are like institutions coming in, corporations coming in. It could be price. So price is a representation of the super cycle. It'd be the KPI, or how we indicate performance. Right now we're in a bit of a dip. I've been in Bitcoin since 2013, so I'm used to these sort of dips. But we could see 2013 kind of be echoed today. Where 2013 we went from $10 to 260 down to 60, and then 60 to 1200. And so, we could see something like that this year. So yeah, the manifestation of a super cycle in terms of numbers would be a cycle that is larger than a typical one, or has a less intense bear market. Now, we are not through a bull run yet. The bull run's got at least another 6 to 8 months. A lot of people are calling for this to be the end of the bull run, that they haven't been through 2013 like I have and many others have. So that's the super cycle. That's where we are now. And that's what we look to measure performance as.
Interesting. You touched on a couple things that I'd like to go a bit further in depth with, which is this sort of view of government and money, or just the existence, I guess, of government. Because you and I both know that amongst Bitcoiners, there's a large libertarian community involved. And I'd like to hear your views on what government should be doing along the sakes of Bitcoin, especially because of the news that broke this week with El Salvador that's finally acknowledging Bitcoin as legal tender. And so I'd just like to see what your views are, not only with that news, but also what you think that governments should be doing around the world or should not be doing around the world.
Yeah, you can't fight Bitcoin. That's ultimately what's it. Like, you can't fight it. And governments would be better to embrace Bitcoin than to try to reject it or push against it. Bitcoin is a decentralized Bitcoin is decentralized at the highest degree in terms of in the crypto space. It's meant to resist state level attacks. If your citizens buy it, your better option is to lean into it and provide them with resources and keep them in your country. Give them preferable tax treatment. Make sure that they're happy with the government, versus trying to, trying to find them and squish them. I think that's a very bad policy. And so we're seeing governments across the world, take a mixed approach. Some are very draconian and try to crack down on it. Some embrace it. Ultimately, you can't stop it. So I think the better solution for governments is to embrace it and embrace the community, embrace the ideas of it, and recognize that this new world eventually won't have government currencies. That's just going to be how it is, instead of trying to fight it.
You touched on a topic that I think is finally starting to surface in the mainstream media, I guess, and amongst a lot of people, which is this idea of central bank digital currencies. Because I agree with you, and obviously as a Bitcoiner, I find the idea of CBDCs appalling and just a direct violation of human rights and all the things that go along with it. But what makes you think that government currencies might not exist or not really have a place?
Because they previously weren't competitive, right? Like, you'd have these different governments, and it's hard to have another digital or like a cryptocurrency representation of another form of money inside that same ecosystem. Like, it'd be hard for you to, and before the internet, to carry around bills of euros, around in the United States and hope to find a counterparty. Digitally, it's much easier to do that. So that really changes the dynamic of how different regions compete with each other. So yeah, I don't think CBDCs are not like an innovation. A lot of people like to tout that CBDCs are like an innovation, and they're really more. I mean, we already have a digital dollar.
Yeah.
It's already existed for over a decade, right? Like, it exists in many different forms: Venmo, PayPal, my bank between your bank, FedWire, wire system, ACH. That's all digitized. There's not physical delivery. So the digital dollar has been around for a while, but CBDCs, these are like another measure of control. So yeah, I think they're very distinctively different. I think the main point and main takeaway here is that they're very different and basically the polar opposite of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's innovation isn't just being like a digital currency. It's being a currency that's impossible to seize, or nearly impossible to seize, immutable, which means you can send it to any other address, and has a monetary policy that can't be changed. That's why it's valuable, not because it's just digital. And I think that that's kind of a misunderstanding that has propagated from kind of the earlier days of Bitcoin, is like, oh, it's just a digital currency. No, it's much deeper than that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'd like to touch on your personal views, I guess, maybe going a little bit more into the philosophy, I guess, of Bitcoin, and just what is Bitcoin to you at its core element? What attracts you to it? What do you think should attract? Well, what do you think really lives in the sort of center of the protocol that could that somebody might find it and you find it appealing?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin has been it's a majestic woven architecture of physics, game theory. Um, it's not just code. I think a lot of people misrepresent Bitcoin as like just being digital or code. No, it's code that enforces a set of rules that harnessed a bunch of humans to work together. And I think that's what's really interesting is the game theory and like the architecture of Bitcoin itself, like the how Bitcoins are issued and how proof of work works, with Bitcoin mining and energy. This is all like very, very physics and human driven. And that's what I think is super beautiful about it. And that's what I've written about in a lot of my content. For example, like planting Bitcoin and proof of work is efficient. These articles cover those topics. And I think for a lot of people, it's the first time that it's been explained to them. And when I first learned about it, it was a aha moment for me where I'm like, now I get it. Like, this is so much more than just code. And the beautiful simplicity of Bitcoin's architecture has survived this long, which is incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible. The game theory and incentive model to get all these humans to work together was genius.
Did you think that when you first got involved in 2013, did you ever think that by 2021, we'd be seeing institutions onboarding, we'd be seeing the first country start adopting it? Did you see we'd be at the level we are now?
I don't think so. I think back then we thought it was going to take, like our whole lifetime. I think for Bitcoin to be adopted. And I think it happened a lot faster than most people, I mean, remember in 2013, like we didn't have much information, we're going through like one of the first, I think, yeah, there's the 2011 cycle to $30, and then the 2013 cycle to 1200. There wasn't a lot of information to go off of, Bitcoin was still like it, when we look back now and we look at that nice, exponential chart, it all seems to have always made sense, but it wasn't always the case back then.
And thinking about the place that we're at now, at the Bitcoin conference, which was just this last week, you were on the panel about Hyperbitcoinization. What do you think is the view, or what would be the path towards that Hyperbitcoinization? What stage do you think we are in now regarding the current market and the current mainstream, or I guess worldwide adoption?
Yeah, so I think that we are very on track for the hyper Bitcoinization, which is basically Bitcoin becoming the global world reserve currency, the store of value chosen by everyone in the world. I mean, Bitcoin hit $1 trillion market cap. That was a huge milestone, and we've got institutions formally recognizing it as gold 2.0. I mean, I waited 8 years to see that moment. We were considered lunatics. Like, we were actually considered crazy people in 2013. Absolutely insane. So for them to recognize it now, I think is a hugely bullish signal for me. I couldn't be more happy where the state of Bitcoin is at. Sure, could the price be a little higher? Sure. We're still in the middle of a bull run, so we'll see how the rest of the year plays out.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see how we carry on and what people because I've been involved in Bitcoin for about 4 years now, it'll be interesting to see how people that are just getting involved in the space now are dealing with this whole market dip and market correction and ups and downs and things like that. Last week, or in the past couple of weeks, I want to guide you towards something you said before about proof of work and energy consumption, which is something that's always on the mind of not only Bitcoiners, I guess, but also Bitcoin critics and people who are just getting involved in the space. We saw the ESG sort of set up this odd council that kind of didn't make sense to much. And there was this whole battle cry from Bitcoiners all around saying this is antithesis to the whole Bitcoin idea or ethos. What's your view on that, the council on energy consumption and the FUD that gets thrown around a lot by the mainstream media regarding energy and Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, a lot of people like to criticize Bitcoin's energy consumption, but here's how you can detect that it's coming from a very dishonest place. Well, if you're going to criticize Bitcoin's energy consumption, why don't you criticize the dollar and gold? Of course they don't. They never do, ever, ever, ever. In the 8 years I've been in this space with the thousands of battles I've had on Twitter, not one person has ever calculated that when criticizing Bitcoin's energy consumption. So that's one, very dishonest. It means that they're singling out Bitcoin because they don't like it, And that's ultimately the core root of this argument, is that a lot of people don't like Bitcoin and that any energy consumption would be perceived as wasteful. Now, the secondary part of the conversation is the energy mix. Where does Bitcoin mine? Where do Bitcoin miners, where are they placed, and what energy do they consume? Well, Bitcoin miners don't dictate which energy is created. They just consume whatever energy was created. And they're the bidder of the lowest bidder across the world. They're willing to pay the least amount of money for electricity, which means they're buying the basically what would have otherwise gone wasted electricity. So some people criticize Bitcoin's energy mix because some of that includes coal. Well, when was the last time someone, no one asks you what your computer energy mix is, right? Like, what was the coal percentage for your computer? What's the coal percentage of you watching TV? No one asks you that because it'd be absurd. They single out Bitcoin because they don't like it. That's the core root of this entire argument, because no one ever looks at their own energy mix or energy consumption for anything else with the same critical lens that they look at Bitcoin's energy consumption. So with that, the argument, I think, is really dishonest.
And along the lines of the ESG Council, what's your view on sort of miners getting together? There was this whole view on one particular miner, which was Marathon, that decided to start censoring transactions. And then they had to obviously backtrack on that censoring. And then, there was this whole battle cry of everybody around, because Bitcoin, one of the main things is that it's censorship resistant. So to have this sort of one particular miner decide to start censoring transactions went completely against the protocol.
Yeah. So miners don't control Bitcoin. They're the hired guards to ensure that the ordering of transactions occurs. The Bitcoin community can easily overthrow and disrupt miner activity. Regarding miners who were censoring, they're willing to forego earning income by processing transactions. To be clear, no government asked them to do this. Doing this is the equivalent of trying to censor individual packets on the internet. Like, this is not a rational thing to do, nor is it required legally. Illegal thing, people are doing illegal things, drink water, but doesn't make water illegal. So there's a really bad virtue signaling moment for that company. It is really distasteful, because it's, one, not required legally, two, is counter to Bitcoin's core ethics. And three, is also less revenue producing, so they'll make less money. And then fourth, it's impossible to do. As soon as their addresses were revealed, Bitcoiners sent them dirty coins just to mess with them. So, I think that's that's exactly the problem here, right? Like, you can't really do that with the Bitcoin protocol, and it's just overall really dumb to do, not antithetical to the ethos of the space, and impossible to enforce.
I'd like to guide you down a path of monetary policy and the topic of inflation, which obviously comes very close to the whole point of Bitcoin, or one of the main points of Bitcoin, which is a hedge against inflation and this idea of being a store of value. The Fed came out telling us that we wouldn't get inflation, and now that inflation is going to be transitory, obviously, and then who knows what the next transition or what it's transitioning into. What are your views on the Fed changing their policies, making up different metrics along the way, and this whole idea of inflation somehow being a momentary thing?
It's a classic maneuver of move the goalpost when the goalposts don't agree with the outcome you want. I mean, it's pretty clear what they're doing. They're moving the goalpost because things are starting to shift, and then they're trying to act like this was somehow planned, or they've got the control over it. It's all about confidence. Everyone has to be confident that they have control over the economy. And that's what the beauty of Bitcoin is we don't have to trust any human. We don't have to interpret what tie they wore on TV. You don't have to interpret their words. All we have to interpret is the code, and the code is the same, and it doesn't change. We don't have to worry about the monetary policy changing ever. And so I think that's a really important distinction here when we look at Bitcoin versus fiat currency, is we're trusting that they know what they're doing, and as history has shown us, they have no idea what they're doing. Which is entirely intuitive. There's no way to predict the future. If we did, then I'd be a trillionaire, and everyone would be a trillionaire, and so you can't. And they can't either. And they have limited sets of data that is historical data. It's not future. You can't predict the future. So it's kind of like the analogy I use is like, imagine they're driving a car. The Fed is driving a car, which is the economy. Now, all they have is the rear view mirror. They don't have the front windshield. They can't look forward. They can't see into time. They can't see into the future. And so and then when they drive, when they touch the steering wheel or touch the brake or gas, there's like a 5-second delay. Like, how would you possibly drive that car? You're looking in the rear view mirror to steer you going towards the future. I mean, that's impossible. Instead, it should be self-driving, which is what Bitcoin is.
That's a brilliant analogy. And what would you, along those lines, what would you say to somebody who continues to believe in the fiat standard, or continues to believe in the US dollar or government issued currencies, and continues to look at these board of so-called experts deciding what's good for the economy, what's not good, what's good for monetary policy, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it's the past. It's like it's the horse versus a car. We're in a whole new paradigm. I think a lot of people just haven't wanted to go down that rabbit hole, because when you do, you have to question everything else about your government, and that's a very stressful thing to do. Most people don't want to wake up and be like, I want to undermine all of my previous thinking about how the whole world works. I get it. I understand. I mean, they probably have a more stress-free life than the rest of us who worry about this all the time. But they're on the wrong side of history, and eventually they'll figure that out.
A topic that I wanted to touch on is the idea of Bitcoin maximalism and the idea of other protocols in the whole cryptocurrency space. On my newsletter, I don't touch on altcoins. I mainly dedicate myself to Bitcoin completely. And that's garnered some views and some critiques from people who listen to the program and who read my newsletter and are my subscribers, that would like a little bit more information on the whole of the cryptocurrency space. What are your views on altcoins, I guess, on Ethereum, that's right now taking a huge space in the mainstream media, or now a lot of people are paying attention to these alternative coins, and you've dedicated yourself for a long time to Bitcoin and are a staunch defender of Bitcoin. What do you think about this whole, or about all the other projects that exist?
Yeah, so look, there's a lot of interesting things going on in the space. So I think that people are free to go explore whatever they'd like. I've been around for 8 years and I've seen 10,000 cryptocurrencies come and go. So for me, I like Bitcoin because of its beautiful simplicity, the problem it's trying to solve, which is solving the problem of trust with governments. I think that is the biggest problem that a blockchain can solve. That's why Satoshi built Bitcoin with his blockchain technology, not anything else. So with that, I think that Bitcoin is tackling the biggest issue in the space. It's tackling the most important issue. And I love the beauty and simplicity of it. And so that's why I keep falling back in love with the Bitcoin architecture and protocol and everything else around it. So that's why I like it. I certainly think other coins are working on some interesting things. I think that very, very few of those are interesting. But that's just my personal opinion.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm also on that. I wouldn't call myself a Bitcoin maximalist, but I think I dedicate myself a lot more time to Bitcoin. And I think that people should dedicate their time to really understanding Bitcoin, because it's got so many branches and so many different features. And it's just like you say, it's the simplicity of the architecture itself that makes it so unique and so beautiful, that really should garner all of your attention before looking into the other areas of cryptocurrency. We touched on it slightly before, but we're in a bit of a dip, which for a lot of new people who are getting involved, amongst them, my girlfriend is just getting involved. And they're kind of not understanding what to do with this whole correction. I'm trying to obviously calm the waters a little bit, telling them that it's part of the volatility is part of it. But you've been around for a lot worse. What do you say to the people who are just getting involved now, who see these massive volatility and don't really know what to do?
Yeah, good question. So, well, my last name kind of gives you a hint. You hodl. Yeah. So with Bitcoin, I've been in the end since Bitcoin is $10. We've been through far worse moments. 2013, Bitcoin went from $10 to 260, back down to 60, and then went horizontal for 3 months, and then boom, 60 to 1200. So we could very much have that. Bitcoin, in terms of what problem it's solving, nothing has changed there, and it's still solving that problem very elegantly. More and more people across the world are waking up to Bitcoin's value and promise. So I think that, with Bitcoin, I don't think really much has changed there. So that's what I would say to people is nothing has changed since you entered your position. The price has only decreased, which puts this fear inside you because the price is lower. It's the same opposite emotion when the price is going up and you were willing to go buy Bitcoin with your credit card. So Bitcoin exposes these raw emotions, and you should try to fight those. Typically, the best traders in the world learn how to fight those emotions and trade the opposite of how they feel. When they feel panic and fear, that's the time to buy. When the market's elated and they feel like everyone's making money, then maybe that's the time to sell. So I think that, right now is a kind of a classic moment where I've hodled a long, long time, and I'm not immune to feeling fearful. I'm not immune to feeling this anxiety or doubt, but I don't act on it. And I think that's the important distinction, is just recognize that you're feeling that only because the price dipped, not because something core changed about Bitcoin. You feel that you didn't feel this way 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. You feel it now because the price is lower. So recognizing that is an important distinction. With any investment, you should always enter in with an investment thesis. My investment thesis hasn't changed. Bitcoin is gold 2.0. And I think that we are well on the way to it becoming gold 2.0. And so with that, I plan on hodling.
Brilliant. Yeah, nothing has changed. Exactly. And we're kind of running out on time, so I just wanted to ask you one last question. What keeps you going in this space? When you wake up every day excited to work for Bitcoin, what is it that really just fuels that excitement and that willingness to carry on?
I think Bitcoin's our greatest chance at human freedom. Like, if Bitcoin succeeds, this will fundamentally change how governments and citizens work together. Like, this will be one of the biggest changes ever in human history. And this will now allow people to be more free than they've ever been, because nothing is more important than money. Who cares if you have the freedom of speech if you have no freedom of money, right? So money is inherent. It's the stored time and energy that you've spent to earn it. So it's inherent to the human existence, right? So I think that that's why I keep waking up every day. Is I'm a libertarian, and I think that Bitcoin, one, solves that problem with money. But once people go down that rabbit hole and think about why does their government control money, then they're like, why does my government control my body? Why does my government control this or that? And that, I think, achieves better human happiness, is being free. And so that's what I hope Bitcoin solves, and that's why I keep coming back to this space.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that probably goes along why I keep on coming up in this space and carrying on and trying to educate as many people as I can. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to answer these questions, to have a chat, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, who knows if we can talk again in the future, and all the best.
Thanks for having me on, Pedro.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.